Okay, looks like everybody's in. So thank you for joining us this morning for the first session in the skills and learning track. Before I hand over to Steve and Robbie for this morning's session, I just wanted to cover a couple of issues of sort of housekeeping. Everybody is being joined in with mute and cameras off, so you don't need to worry if you're being seen or if you're still having your breakfast. If you have any questions, please use the chat window and we will endeavour to deal with any questions you have at the end of the presentation, unless there's anything urgent, in which case I can interrupt Steve and Robbie or send them a message to let them know what's going on. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome both Stephen Horsman and Robbie Avil from the Hersley Lab for session 6AA, Modernising the Mainframe, the what, the how and the why of Zowe. So all over to you guys.
Great, thanks Paul. And yep, good morning everyone. I hope you're doing well in this early start, and I hope you've embraced the conference hotel experience like I did and had a cooked breakfast waiting under a heat lamp for half an hour before you ate it this morning. So luckily you're all muted, as Paul said, so I'm just going to assume that there was a laugh that rang out through everyone. I'm Steve Horsman, so I've been working, as Paul said, at Hersley. I've been working on mainframe tooling for 11 years now, and today I'm joined by my colleague.
Hi everyone, I'm Robbie Avil. Like Steve says, been working in IBM for the past 5 years now. Started as an apprentice in the Z space and been working on Zowe for the past 6 months.
Yep, so yeah, we're both Zowe software engineers, so we're here to try and share a bit of our knowledge and enthusiasm with you on why we think Zowe helps modernize the mainframe. So here's a look at what we're going to try and cover today. So we have talked about Zowe in the last 2 GSE UKs. So I've done a whole hour slot on just what Zowe is, but so hopefully some people have got some ideas, but we want to do a very whistle-stop tour overview just to bring everyone up to a basic level in case you're not familiar with it, or remind people who have heard before and but were a little bit worse for wear or getting old like me, so have forgotten it. So we're going to kick off with that. Then we're going to go to the sort of first meaty section, the sort of how Zowe works and the how to install and configure. There's a lot of conference presentations about Zowe, and they're mostly targeted towards application developers. There's another, I think, 3 or 4 at GSE UK this year. But what we don't often do is try and have something that is kind of the behind the curtains of Zowe, so that the system administrators and stuff have got an idea. So that's what we're trying to go for with this middle section. It's the kind of the how Zowe works. If you're installing it, what might you want to look out for? How do the components run, and in what configurations and where? So we're going to go into a bit of a sort of technical architecture session. So hopefully that's of interest to at least some of you. Then our next session is some ideas of why you should be interested in Zowe, what we've seen people use it, particularly in the modernizing space. There's loads more we could cover, but we're just going to pick out some use cases. And then finally, we'll end with a few links to find out more about Zowe and then Q&A. So as Paul said, if you've got questions, pop them in the chat and then we'll cover them afterwards. So let's jump into it. So quick introduction, what's the Open Mainframe project, what's Zowe? Try and explain the 2 logos you see. So very briefly, so the Open Mainframe project is a subset of the Linux Foundation, which look after loads of open source software, not just Linux, but things like Helm, Kubernetes, Node.js, etc. So they are the overall maintainer of the Zowe project. As founder companies, which was IBM, Rocket Software, and CA Technologies, now Broadcom, we didn't want to have the ownership in our hands. We wanted it to be truly open, so we looked for an open source project, and OMP was it. So that's why you'll see Open Mainframe on lots of places on my slide. You can count them all if you want, and unfortunately there won't be a prize, but because they are the maintainers and they own the Zowe brand, if you like. So that's what OMP is. Zowe itself it's a project, so it's not a product. It's trying to be a framework. So it came into existence, I think 2 or 3 years ago now. I was there, but can't quite remember. About 3 years ago, as a collaboration between, as I mentioned, IBM Rocket and CA, and we've since been joined by some other vendors. But it was primarily about trying to make a common platform in open source that was extensible for the next generation of ZOS tooling. The main aim behind it was to try and reduce the learning curve and attract new people to the architecture. So when I started on Z 10 or so years ago, the mainframe kind of was this big scary box, which if you had the right wizard spells, you could drive, and it would take you 20 years to be an expert and all of that. It has huge selling points in best scalability, security, all of that, HA failover, all of that stuff, but it was a bit scary, certainly for me as a new starter, to look at these new interfaces. And the parallel I'll make in hardware is mainframes before the Z15. They didn't match the same rack width of all of the rest of the boxes. So in your data center, they were in a separate place in the corner, and they didn't quite fit in. You needed special systems for them. The Z15 changed that, went to the, I think it's 19-inch, the standard rack, and moved the mainframe so it can be in the heart of the data center with the rest of the distributed machines. And we're trying to do the same thing with Zowe. We're trying to say the mainframe is still special, but if we can bring it to everybody, make it accessible to people who are familiar with more distributed backgrounds or new graduates, new starters, then that's better for them because they can deal with the best platform, and it's good for us because we can learn new ideas and share experiences. So that's the motivation for Zowe, and we've attempted to achieve it with a set of 3 interfaces and services that drive them. Again, this is just the core Zowe, but it's all about plug-in points, so you can add to it as you want. So both Robbie and I are going to talk about the components in more details, but just a quick summary. We've got a set of microservices or REST APIs for ZOS resource, which are wrapped in an API mediation layer. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry, we'll be referring to it. A command line interface to help you drive predominantly sort of automated DevOps type approaches. A VS Code extension, the Zowe Explorer, to help bring the mainframe into the world's most popular IDE, and a browser-based web desktop, virtual desktop, to enable you to interact with UIs without having any installable client. So that's the very quick overview, and we're going to just jump into some of those technologies. It's going to be a really quick run through so that we've got time to cover the rest of it, but hopefully you'll be able to pick it up. So the CLI is the first thing I'm going to talk to. And some people might think, oh, CLI is a bit 1980s, which was probably true. And then in the 90s and 2000s, everyone switched to GUIs. And when I started at IBM, I worked on the ZOS Explorer and the CICS Explorer, which is all about managing ZOS and CICS with your mouse and keyboard and right clicks to make it easier to use. And that's definitely still a valid path. But as we're moving through the sort of DevOps revolution, there's a lot of emphasis on automation and what can you script. It's okay to deploy stuff one-off with right clicks, and typing. But if we want to scale up and treat systems and programs in a more uniform way by making build pipelines which can automatically deploy and test, then we need to add some automation. And the way that most of the world, if you look at AWS, Azure, Cloud Foundry, CLI, etc., Ansible have jumped on this is with CLIs and an emphasis on scripting. So the Zowe CLI is trying to elevate the mainframe resources so you can speak to them through the command line. So the Zowe CLI is a node application which runs on your desktop, so on your laptop, so distributed system, so your laptop or desktop. It's installed in a couple of different ways, either direct from npm.js or from a package on a website I'll point you at later. And it just uses npm, which is the node package manager, to install. So to get it up and running, the base CLI that I'm going to show you, you need to install it, and then you need to run this Zowe command, which will appear when you're installed, and create a profile. So a lot of the core ZOS resource functionality is provided by connecting to ZOSMF on the back end. So in this scenario, I've done an install, and I've the white lines are and creating a profile, so telling my CLI how to contact ZOSMF. The orange sections show you some examples of plugins you can install. There's a lot of plugins from ZOS Connect to Kix to secure storage options that you can install into Zowe, but I'm mostly going to focus on the base ones today. So I'm just going to run through a few examples just to give you an idea of what you can do. So one of the cool things about the Zowe CLI is if you ever get stuck, you can type --help. So here, straight introduction, you can type Zowe --help. You'll see a little bit of information, a description, and then the usage, so you can see all the groups. So if you type Zowe group, where group is one of these, you can see more information. So you can see I've installed the Kix plugin here, but we've got the base resources, issuing TSO console commands, and interacting with files, jobs, and workflows in USS. So a very few examples of what you can do with that. The CLI is installed into your shell. So this is just a standard bash shell you can see. So that's really fantastic because it means we can start exploiting and interacting with the sort of best of breed Linux tools that the distributed folk use all the time. So in this one, I'm doing a very simple MVS command. So I'm issuing a dspace-al, so display address spaces, the list here, but on my system, we've got lots of address spaces. And so I went, oh, I just want to see the MQ channel initiator address spaces. So I just did a pipe the output into grep of chin, and then I've instantly got a filter. So rather than having to go through it manually, I can just go and get all of the, like I say, the Unix processes and shell commands and add them into Zowe and unlock the mainframe to those. So that's an example. We can also interact with data sets. So in this case, I'm saying Zowe ZOS files list all the members of the PDS stephen_h.jcl. And we've got short job, which we'll use again in a couple of slides. I can interact with jobs, so I can say list me all of the jobs with certain owner and prefix filtered. So look at all of the Zowe started tasks. I can submit a job, so that short job member that I had you saw earlier in my PDS stephen_h.jcl, I can submit it using Zowe jobs submit dataset, and it returns the job ID. So I can then take that and use it to get the status of the job by putting it in and see whether the job has finished yet. So in isolation, each command is not super interesting, but you can see how with a bit of scripting, you can start to pipe and flow these together. So I could submit a data set as a job, parse out the output the job ID and then pipe it straight in here and run a while loop. So say wait for 10 seconds and see if the job has completed by interrogating the status by output. Everything in the CLI can be returned in a few different ways. So this is the human readable way, but you can also return it as JSON messages, which is great for parsing out. If you're interested in that, then Robbie's going to mention that the DevOps type of scenario, there's going to be a lot more detail on it in a session later today. Right, so that's the basis of the CLI. So you can expand it for DevOps, or the SDK that underpins it can also be used for another technology that Robbie's going to talk you through.
Yep, so thanks, Steve. So like he says, that we have building on top of the Zowe CLI is the Zowe Explorer, which we've spoken about earlier briefly. It's the VS Code extension offering that we have for Zowe. So to find it, it's as easy as going to the VS Code marketplace, typing in Zowe, and there you'll see the Zowe Explorer page. As you can see from the screenshot, at the time that was taken, we had 19,166 downloads. I think that was about 2 weeks ago. Since then, we have actually broke the milestone for 20,000 downloads, which is great. And if you go on and check today, it might be more than that. I haven't actually checked, so who knows, could be a 21 by now. The great thing about the Zowe Explorer is that it gives you the ability to view jobs, datasets, and the USS file structure that is on the mainframe that you have linked to. So setting it up is as easy as searching for Zowe, pressing install, and then you link it to a mainframe. So like we have the example here that is linked to the mainframe 3B in Hersley. Obviously that's set up just as a profile. It's easily done with a few bits of information that you need to put in. And another great thing that you can do with the Zowe Explorer is that you can link up with other VS Code extensions. For example, on the screen there, you can see some JCL syntax highlighting on the JCL that Steve has opened as a demo. Generally, that isn't there as a standard for VS Code, but that's the great thing is you can link it with different plugins, and there's thousands on the marketplace for VS Code to really tailor it to make sure it can do what you want. So on top of the Zowe Explorer, we also have the Zowe Web Desktop, which we spoke about briefly before. Just have a quick drink. Now, this web desktop is an intuitive place for all of the different ZOS services all within one place. The best thing about it, in my opinion, is that there is no install required. It's all done in pure HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, all within a browser. And what we tried to do with this is provide sort of all of the old and all of the new. So what you get when you attempt to log into the web desktop is you're shown a splash login page, which is a lot similar to what you would see going into just a general website or a generic GUI logging into something, rather than a 3270 session where you're logging in via TSO, which for a new starter might be slightly confusing. And I know when I started trying to find where your cursor is and type in the right place, all of that is slightly harder than you would maybe want it to for your first time with these kinds of systems. So the web desktop obviously makes that a lot easier, as you can see from there. And once you log in, you're presented with, as I've sort of alluded to, all of the old with all of the new. So as you can see on the screen there, you can have a 3270 terminal on this web desktop that displays the job status for prefix Zowe. Or we can see behind it is the web desktop way of doing it, which is a slightly more graphical way of doing it with a twisty, and then you can see the outputs from there. Another good example of this is the where you view dataset members. Again, you could do that via the 3270 terminal that is available in the web desktop, or you can use the file explorer that is shown behind. Again, it's not trying to take away anything, just provide more options if you want to do something else or do it a different way. There's the third option, very similar to like there is in the Explorer, how you have the jobs, the datasets, and USS. Same here in the web desktop. There is the USS file explorer, so you can either access that via the SSH terminal, which is the black and white, or there's the 3270 terminal, which everyone recognizes the green screen, or there's the sort of generic web desktop file editor that I've mentioned before in the options in the background. And finally, there are different file editors that are available within the web desktop. So USS, as you can see there, is an option, or in beta, there is the datasets option, and more will potentially be worked on. So this really is the best of both worlds. You can have all of the old, all of the new, not forced into doing it in any particular way. You can just do whatever you're most comfortable with and what makes you feel most at home with the mainframe. So that's those two things. Let me pass back to Steve to talk in a bit more detail about the APIs.
Great, cheers, Robbie. And yeah, just to emphasize it, in all of these, we're showing you the core Zowe experience. So what comes if you install just the base, but they are extensible. There's commercial applications and other open source applications that run in the desktop, adds to the CLI, adds APIs as well. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about the APIs and the mediation layer. And the reason it matters, that I guess there's two things. Firstly, APIs power everything else you've seen. So without the APIs getting the resources, we'd have nothing to show. And also it allows you to go direct to the APIs and build your own applications or your own scripts. So if you want a custom address space browser which says I'm going to filter it to only show address spaces that are owned by me and have the prefix ZWE, I could use the APIs to make an app and then install it into the desktop if I wanted. And to help facilitate all of Zowe, we've got something called the API mediation layer. So what that is effectively a bunch of services which try and make it easier to use APIs on ZOS. So the first one is the API gateway, which is based on the Netflix Zowe open source technology. This is about providing a single entry point into your mainframe. So rather than having loads of different ports you need to remember and switching connections like you're changing channels on a TV, we just have a single place and it can reroute all of the requests to other services. The next main feature is the discovery service. So this is based on Netflix Eureka, and this enables you to either dynamically or statically register API applications and UI applications to the gateway. It allows some monitoring and HA management as well. And as we look at more HA scenarios in Zowe going forward, this will be useful. The third part is the API catalog, which I'll show you in a minute. This aims to be a single place that you can explore and learn about all of the APIs that are on your mainframe. So you can go and look at the documentation based on Swagger or OpenAPI and see how to use them. Lastly, there's some sort of core security services in here. So this enables things like JWT support and single sign-on. So if you onboard a bunch of other tooling, maybe commercial tooling from one of the vendors that's Zowe conformant, then rather than logging in, like I said, with the change in channel and having to provide different logon credentials every time, if you use the single sign-on service through Zowe and their single sign-on enabled, then you can log in once and your session and your sign-on will be shared across all of the services. So it just reduces that friction between them. So here's the main API catalog again for core Zowe without any extensions added. So we've got tiles for some base Zowe services here, but we've also got some COS resources, so the data sets and USS files and job services. So if you click on any of these tiles, you'll see something like this. So this is a Swagger generated UI. If you're not familiar with that, it's basically Swagger's a technology or OpenAPI, which allows you to annotate your endpoints to make them explorable. So you can see in here on our datasets version 2, a set of APIs, we've got a whole bunch of REST requests. So get a list of data sets, delete a data set, create a data set. And each of these you can drop down and it will show you all the parameters they can take. Scrolled off the screen, you can see the type of responses that you'll receive, and you can try it out in this view if you click the execute. We're definitely, just to be clear, we're not saying this is how you have to interact with APIs. This is just a way to help you explore them. Once you've worked out the APIs that you want, obviously go and take those URLs that it will generate for you, and you can add them to your own apps or your own scripts. But that's a very quick whistle-stop tour of the 4 components in Zowe. We've got the CLI, the VS Code extension, the desktop, and the APIs. So now we're going to get into our first scary section of how Zowe works. So the bit which is scary is possibly this diagram. So it's quite busy, but I'll try and talk you through it. So this is the architecture diagram for Zowe effectively. If we've not done a good enough job of explaining it so far, I'll just reiterate there's kind of 2 halves to Zowe, if you like, the install. So this sort of top section is the CLI and the Zowe Explorer VS Code plugin. So these are installed on your distributed machine, so on your laptop. They do not have a hard prereq of any Zowe server components. So the stuff that I showed you earlier, you can do just by going to ZOSMF and having the CLI installed without any server. If you want to use things like SSO and in future client certificates, MFA, etc., then going through the gateway will enhance that experience, but is not required. Similarly, if you install any of the extensions like the Kix plugin for the CLI, you just need a Kix region with a CMCI connection to talk to. It doesn't need to go through the Zowe server at all. So the install for that, as I mentioned, is either from installing through the marketplace like Robbie showed you for the Zowe Explorer, or grabbing and installing with npm. So that's kind of simplish. The rest of it, this sort of section, is what we call the ZOS server component of Zowe. So that's made up of a bunch of different address spaces, and each of these boxes is roughly, there's a 1-to-1 mapping of an address space and a port to the component. So I'll start from the bottom and work my way up. So this first one, the XMEM or cross memory server, this, unlike the rest of the server, runs in its own address space. So this is sort of provides privileged cross-memory services for the Zowe desktop. So it runs, it's an APF authorized program to allow that special access. That runs under the ZWE SISTC started task. And at the moment, you only need one of them per LPAR, and it can run multiple desktops and multiple servers. The rest of the stack is all runs under a single started task. So that's ZWE SVSTC started task, and that will trigger all of these services. If you only want to run various components of Zowe and you don't want to run all of it, you can modify configuration to affect what's brought up, but I won't go into that just for lack of time at the moment. So if we go around some of these services just to explain how they work, the sort of stack we've got here is ZSS and the desktop. So this purple box, ZSS server, is a Metal C and C component. It basically has a bunch of services which provide some APIs and driving data for the desktop, which is this green box. So things like the file editor, the 3270 emulator, they all run in the desktop application, this node application, and they use the ZSS to provide the resources and the power and the services to drive them. So that's sort of the desktop stack, which includes the web browser component Zowe Virtual Desktop that you saw Robbie demo earlier. Those will run under the ZWED for desktop prefix in your and the default ports we've annotated on here. The next sort of section is the mediation layer. So that's these 3 yellow boxes. I've already sort of talked about what they do. The gateway, the catalog, and the discovery service. So they will all run under ZWE-A, their address space. So it'll be ZWE-AG for the gateway, AC for the catalog, and AD for the desktop. So if you go and look in SDSF and look at address spaces, then you'll be able to see those, and similarly in the log they'll be appended with those codes. The explorers, which you saw as the background in Robbie's slides with the 3270 emulator on the top of them, they're the UI applications, again node based, which you can contact directly through the gateway, but they're also installed into the desktop. So if you have the desktop, you can access them in there, but if you don't, you can go direct to them. They're also node applications. And finally, we've got a couple of Java applications similar to the gateway, so zip offloadable, which provide the APIs for the Explorer app. So we've got the files and the desktop API. So this is the current configuration of Zowe as it is. In the next sort of 6 months or so, one of our key objectives we do something called PI planning is to enable HA support for Zowe. So at the moment, this is all on a single LPAR, but we're starting to look at scenarios of, well, what about running certain things cross Sysplex and having multiple copies of really core services like the gateway and different variants. We're also thinking further forward about containerization, particularly things like the Node and Java components. If we can move them off platform into containers, the Node components can potentially help save a bit of processor cost, and embracing that hybrid cloud scenario of the mainframe and containers, either off platform or in something like CCX. So it's kind of a watch this space, but this is where we're at the moment. So if you are a system programmer and you install Zowe and you see different services coming up and address spaces and stuff like that, then hopefully you've got a bit of an idea of how they map now and how you need to start and stop your Zowe process. So that's a very quick kind of run through of the architecture. And now I'm just going to talk about how you might do the setup and install. So the first thing is getting Zowe. So if you go to, as most things, it starts with zowe.org. So if you go to zowe.org, there's a download link at the top. For both the server and client side, there's 2 different ways you can get it. For the server side, the first way is a PAX format convenience build. And the second one is the sort of more enterprisey solution of an SMPE build. So we've got the base FMID AZWE001, and then on a roughly monthly cadence, we upload full roll-up PTFs to update that. So the latest one is 1.16. From the client side, CLI, as I've mentioned, you can either download it through npm.js, or if for an offline install, you can download the packages from the website here and install them. So the prereqs, this is just the start of the screen. It does scroll down. This is from the Zowe doc, but the overall, basically the core prereqs you need is a ZOS version in active support. So that's 2.3 or 2.4 at the moment. To have all of the power of Zowe, you will need ZOSMF, so ZOSMF, and if you want certain SSO and JWT logout support and you're running 2.3, there is also an LPAR, which is optional prereq. To use the SSH VT terminal, you'll also need OpenSSH. So this isn't anything particularly new, some stuff that mostly comes out of the box. Similarly, Java 8 is required for the Java components. The main sort of extra which you may not have is Node. So in order to get the desktop and the UI apps running, Node is required, and that's either Node 8 or 12, which are the supported versions of ZOS at the moment. If you want to look through the stuff that I'm going to talk about on the installation roadmap, then the doc has been revamped in the last few months to try and make it a lot clearer. So if you go to either docs.zowe.org or click on the doc link in zowe.org, then the bit I'm showing you is in user guide and installing ZOS, Zowe ZOS components. So if you go there, you can see, or follow this link, you can see the installation roadmap. So I'm just going to talk you through it briefly so you get an idea. If someone comes to you and says, oh, we want to get Zowe installed, then what's the questions you need to answer and what's the rough flow? So the first thing you need to do, obviously make sure your system requirements are met and everything, but you need to decide, are you going to do the SMPE install or the convenience build? If you're doing SMPE, then it's the standard SMPE installer that I'm sure your shop is used to dealing with. The convenience build, that's what I use personally in development. It's a little bit lighter weight. You just take a PAX, transfer it via FTP or SFTP to your mainframe, unpacks it, expand it, and then run a Zowe install sh script. We also have, for most of the flow of Zowe, SOSMF workflows. Some of them are in sort of a bit in progress, so they may be sort of beta-ish, but if you're a shop that likes SOSMF workflows, then those are available. Once we've done this install step, whether we've done SMPE or convenience, you should have everything laid out in an identical way, and then we go and look into the sort of configuration of it. So the configuration section looks like there's quite a lot of things to run here, but a lot of them are one time only, but I'm just going to briefly go through them again. So the first setup you need to do is the security setup for Zowe. So again, I'll emphasize everything on Zowe is using SAF. We don't have any of our own security manager or anything like that you can go around. So everyone will log in with your normal TSO logon. But what we do need to do is we need to have the user IDs for the Zowe systems created. We need to make sure that the started tasks are defined so that they run under the right user IDs. So we've got the ZWE secure JCL to help with that. All of our scripts for security systems work with RACF, ACF2, and top secret. You just have to switch a flag. But that will help you get that one-time security setup done. The other thing you need to do, either one time or if there are any change, is set up certificates. In order to get the communication between Zowe using SSL via HTTPS, you need to have certificates. So you can do this in a few different ways. Either if you don't have anything set up and you're running in development or something like that, or in test, you can just let Zowe create for you our self-signed certificates. But equally, if you have an external certificate that's a Pucker signed one, you can use that for Zowe. And we support configuration to either have certificates in Keyring or in a USS key store directory. And again, if you go to the doc page and click on any of these links, you can find more details. They've each got their own page, each box, which will show you how you configure those. And the next sort of two sections here is installing the proclibs effectively for the Zowe, the cross memory server, and the Zowe started task. So you need to get the JCL in your JES2 concatenation. We've provided utility scripts for these, but we are fully aware that a lot of companies have got lockdown systems. So again, if you click on the link, there's the full manual steps which explain what the shell scripts do and what you need to do in order to set it up. And then finally, the one that you might repeat multiple times, if you're like myself, me and Robbie have both got separate systems on our development LPAR. In fact, I've got about 6 or 7 different versions of Zowe installed. The way you do that is create a new instance by running Zowe configure instance, which you do on each install or update of Zowe. What this does is makes a little directory which holds all of your settings and all of the sort of working, the working directory. So it stores the logs of your running Zowe instance. It's the place you can configure which ports are used if you want to test different versions of Java and Node and different configuration sections. Then it's all in this instance.env file, which is in the instance directory. So once you've gone and configured that, you can start it either /s command or using a wrapper script. So we start.sh and then check that it works. So again, all of these boxes, this wasn't supposed to be an exhaustive install guide because unfortunately we don't have time, or maybe fortunately for you actually. But yeah, each of these sections you can click on, find out more information about them, see how they work. But hopefully we've given you an idea of kind of the rough overview. So if someone says, oh, we want Zowe installed, we want to understand how it works on our system, what is it made of, hopefully you've got a bit of more of an idea now. So I've used up a lot of time talking about this, and hopefully if people have nodded off, Robbie's going to share some of the why and the use cases of Zowe, which will get you waken up again. So
yeah, cheers, Steve. Hopefully I'll wake you up a bit if you've fallen asleep. So just before I go into detail exactly on what people use Zowe for, I just want to hit you with some stats, which definitely will wake you up. So as you can see on the screen there, Cobalt Skills Gap is something that I and many people believe is an impending problem for the Z community. At the moment, there's 220 billion lines of Cobol that is in use every day, with a further 5 billion lines of Cobol being written every year. Now, not to insult anyone on this third point, but I'm not with you in person, so I'm not too scared to say it. The average age of a Cobol programmer is 58, with around 10% retiring each year. And add on to that the fact that there's not really much of it being taught at school, there's a potential problem there. So just to give an example of when I came into IBM, you could have convinced me that Cobol was an energy drink and I wouldn't have known any different. No one at school told me what Cobol was. I knew Python and that was it. So what's being done to fix that problem? That brings us to the Open Mainframe project's offering of the Cobol programming course. So this is a completely open source training or programming guide that you can follow along with. It's all done using the Zowe Explorer in VS Code. There's plenty of online resources, including articles that you can read, just hints and tips in little tutorials, or there's, as you can see in the bottom left, full hour-long YouTube videos on how to write Cobol using the Zowe Explorer. There's a whole wealth of information there that you can use if you want to get involved with Cobol. So I'll give a good example again. This year during the coronavirus crisis, I don't know how many people saw, but there was around about half the states in the US who were running on sort of Cobol reliant systems for their unemployment records. Because of the virus increasing those unemployment records, they didn't really know how to cope with the expanding scale of those Cobol programs. And there was quite a big outcry for programmers that knew how to write in Cobol. Because of that, I got contacted by quite a few people asking me, where do I start with Cobol? How do I learn it? And for a lot of people, this before the Cobol programming course, at least, I didn't really know where to point them, because you have to have a 3270 session, you have to have a mainframe, you have to know how a lot of these things work as a prereq. Whereas now, if you want to learn Cobol, you can just go to this Cobol programming course, go on your VS Code, use the Zowe plugin, and you're basically away. It's a lot easier and there's a lot less of a learning curve involved if you just want to learn how Cobol works rather than you want to learn everything there is around a mainframe, because you could be here for years trying to learn all of that stuff. So keeping in with the theme of education and how Zowe is being used for that, we have a good example of Master the Mainframe. So last year, 2019, the Master the Mainframe Challenge had its 50th year anniversary. For those of you that don't know what Master the Mainframe is, it's sort of the beginner base level for mainframe education. So when I started at IBM, the first thing I was told to do to learn how the mainframe worked and how you work on a mainframe was to complete that challenge. So I spent 6 weeks, my first 6 weeks at IBM, reading red books and doing Master the Mainframe, which at the time was quite difficult for me because I only really knew Python. I knew what a regular IDE looked like. A 3270 terminal scared the life out of me. I didn't know where to put the cursor to type, and there's a whole lot of learning that you have to do that I don't want to say is unnecessary, but it didn't you know, there's a lot of stuff that you're trying to learn all at once, and it sort of muddles your brain having all of that going in. So Master the Mainframe going into this year has been updated. It's given a entire revamp, and as you can see there, looks a bit prettier. And now the entire course uses the Zowe Explorer in VS Code, and it doesn't use 3270 terminal as the sort of base to go off. Personally, I see that as quite a big step forward, because now, rather than new people coming in immediately being thrown into the deep end of 3270 and TSO and SDSF and all of those things, they have a bit more of a gentler welcoming, as it were, into the world of the mainframe, where you get to see things in a slightly more user-friendly way. So to give another example of myself, when I started working on the mainframe, and I'm sure other people are the same, but they won't admit to it, I didn't really know that USS and data sets and jobs were all sort of different. I thought it was the same as if you logged into a Linux machine and your file system was there. I thought it was the same. Having Zowe Explorer is the way that you learn how to work with a mainframe. It shows you from the get-go that those three things are different and they're all done in separate locations, and it just breaks things down a bit easier rather than, you know, having to learn everything on the fly. And it's not just education that Zowe is being used in. A good example that we have from one of our partners that we work on this with, Broadcom, is they set up some system monitoring for their infrastructure using the Zowe CLI. So Broadcom, they do quite a few demos of plenty of different things. And in order to do those demos, they obviously have to have infrastructure to run things on. That is where Zowe CLI came into play. So they, at that point in time, didn't really have any monitoring of that infrastructure. They'd come to do a demo and maybe they'd see that their DB2 instance was down, and then they'd spend 10 minutes of that demo trying to bring it up. I think we've all bared witness to demos that go wrong before, so you can see why there was a bit of a need for it. Now, they didn't really know what the best way to go about monitoring these systems or services was, but they thought, hey, we're using Zowe, we're demoing Zowe as part of this anyway. Let's look at doing that. And as you can see there, they had achieved it fairly well. So what you can see on the screen there is a Jenkins monitor. It's the Jenkins dashboard monitor plugin linked up with the Zowe CLI commands, orchestrated all by Jenkins, and is monitoring different services across different LPARs. So as you can see there, there is a PE01 DB2 instance and a PE02 DB2 instance. And they're able to, I think it's just run a very quick build against it every 2 minutes or so, just to make sure that everything's up and running. And essentially from that, you have monitoring of Z systems all done via Zowe CLI. And it's incredibly simple to do. Anyone that's interested in that, I would highly recommend reading the article that's linked beneath. Zowe, Is It Up and Running? By a guy, Jiri at Broadcom. It's a very good read, really interesting, and goes into a lot more detail on exactly how it works if you were intrigued in doing something similar. So the final example I'll give, but won't go into too much detail on, is a cross-platform CICD pipeline. So as we've sort of alluded to previously, pre-Zowe, it was very difficult to have any sort of integration across distributed and mainframe, because there wasn't that driver like the CLI that can sort of plug in the holes of being able to communicate with a mainframe. Normally you would have a distributed pipeline and a mainframe pipeline, and that would be it. They'd be completely separate. But as we've sort of shown little examples of with how you can orchestrate the CLI and use that as a sort of automation feature like Ansible, the ability to create a cross-platform CICD pipeline now exists. So there are two articles I've linked beneath, I think both on the Medium site with our Zowe blog, where you can go and read about a couple of different stories of people who have done this kind of thing. Or if you're still interested, today at 12 o'clock, there is a talk by Joe Winchester and Mark Holland on using Zowe for mainframe DevOps with open source tools. I would highly recommend you go and check that out if this is something that's piqued your interest, because they'll go into a bit more detail on it. So that's just a few of the many use cases of Zowe. Let me pass back to Steve now to just wrap up, give some useful links and things. Steve.
Great, cheers, Robbie. So yeah, hopefully in this session you've understood a little bit more about what Zowe is, how it works under the covers, and some use cases. But we have just touched the surface. I mean, I've personally given, I'm sure the audience weren't happy, but I was asked to give a 3.5-hour talk on Zowe at a previous conference. So I can really drone on about it for a long time. So there's a lot more that we've not covered. So I'm just going to leave you with a few links of where you can find out more. So the first thing is about the ecosystem. So we've tried to emphasize that Zowe is a platform, not product, and it's extensible. We've just been showing you core Zowe, but there's loads of things you can add. One place to find out about these is on the Zowe Conformance Program website. So this is, the OMP runs a conformance program to say things are certified, a bit like the App Store for your mobile phone, that people have come through and said, yeah, we meet this criteria. So here's just a screenshot of some of the items we have on the page. This is just some of the CLI plugins. You can see we've got stuff from Broadcom, Phoenix, IBM, and sort of core Zowe owned extensions. So you can go in there and find out the different products that you can add. Similarly, if you want to go and look at the CLI extensions, a good place to look at the distribution of those is npm.js. So we've got the Zowe maintained ones, such as the Kix CLI, but you can see at the top, there's also things like the ZOS Connect. Their development team created a CLI plugin to help manage the ZOS Connect services through the CLI and things like that. So they're two places to see the extensions in here. Other useful links to find out latest and to get in contact with us. Zowe.org is a great place to start. So that's where you can see the release announcements, get the download, see the documentation, learn about webinars. One thing that I've not put a slide in, but Robbie mentioned with his links, is the Medium blog. There's a Zowe Medium blog. So if you follow the links in his use case section or Google for Zowe and Medium blog, then there's a whole load of articles and blogs people have written about stuff around the topic, like you saw with the CICD. Another place to contact us is the Open Mainframe Project Slack channel, so openmainframeproject.slack.com. So there's channels for different components, for different things like getting installed, getting started with Zowe, and there's literally hundreds of committers, and you can see that in just this channel, whenever I took the screenshot, there was 500 people on it. So all the Zowe committers will hang around in there. So, and finally, GitHub. So if you want to look at the code, or you found a problem or a feature request, you can go into GitHub and either put it on the repo for the component or in the community repo. Someone should file it into the correct place. So please don't forget to submit your session feedback. It really helps us and the conference to know what stuff you're interested in if we're pitching these at the right place. We encourage you, GSEs, supporting the NHS charities together this year. So here's the links for donating to that. And then that's it. So thanks for listening. We've got a few minutes for questions now, and I see a couple of them in the chat which we'll address, but otherwise Our emails are on the front, so or you can come and reach us out on Slack if you want to follow up afterwards. But yeah, well, let's just have a look at the questions. So we've got one Michael Carey. Aware of ZOS Explorer and IDZ, is Zowe viewed as a replacement to these tools? Good question, and a tough one. So at the moment, I would say no. If we go to the components, so certainly from the web desktop, I would say no. The web desktop provides some limited development environment, but it's not anywhere near as rich as something like IDZ. The Zowe Explorer is a more tricky part. So when we first started with the Zowe Explorer, again, it was quite lightweight and shallow with the just being able to access resources. However, it has been enhanced over time. So there is a team within IBM who were based off the IDZ team. They've been working on extension. Its codename was WASI, but I think it's Zowe Open Editor now. So that actually uses some of the engines behind IDZ to do things like the Cobol syntax highlighting, debugging support into VS Code. But I'm definitely Eclipse, IDZ, ZOS Explorer, they're not going away anytime soon. I think VS Code and the Zowe Explorer is another choice that people who like that IDE can use. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's a replacement, but that's a quick answer. So the recommended way, next question is there a recommended way to configure RACF keyrings for Zowe and ZOSMF? So yeah, keyring support was added in beta in 1.15. There is some JCL to help you set up keyrings, but yeah, unfortunately, in the 30 seconds I have left, I would just say, sorry, I'm going to flick through. If you go into the documentation and click on the setup certificate link, then that's the place that you can go and learn about setting up with different settings. So keyring again is in beta, so if you have trouble, please reach out on Slack and stuff like that, and we'll try and get in contact and give you a little bit of help and finesse that. So yeah, sorry there wasn't too much time for questions, and it's a lot of content to cover. I hope you appreciate, but yeah, please feel free to reach out after the event, and I think we'll hand it back. So yeah, thanks for joining us. And
yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah, really encourage you to, like Marcus has said, he's got a session about Zowe CLI. If you go and look in the agenda, there's quite a few about Zowe. So yeah, we encourage you to find out more. So yeah, it's 10 o'clock, so I'll start breathing and stop speaking. I think you're muted, Paul, if you're trying to speak.
Not for the first time. So great session, guys. That was brilliant. Seems to have gone down very well with the audience. You've answered all the questions. So just thank you.
Cheers, guys.